Rob here with 52 things, and we have a really fun thing for you to try today. How to make stop motion. And this just so happens to be the first thing in our 52 Things series. Now this is something that's quick, it's easy, it's something that you should be able to mix into your videos no matter what kind of videos you make. If you do science videos, mix this technique in. Or if you're doing construction videos, mix it in. Or if you're a dad who likes to teach their kids filmmaking, then do it as a weekend project. Literally, stop motion is one of the more fun things that I do with my 6-year-old and my 3-year-old.
So it's taking pictures right now, and I had to move things this way and that way, and I had to write 52 over here. It was complicated.
It was complicated?
Yeah, it took me a long time, and I was just waiting for it to get the best as it can.
So I'm going to start all this out with a broad overview of the genre, just so you can see where you could start and where you might end up with it. And then we're going to kind of look at the intricacies of stop motion, and I have 6 tips for you to think about so you can put into practice for your first stop motion video. And that way you can use it to spice up your website, your intros, your Instagram account, or anywhere you have videos. So this is the first of 52 things, and let me just walk you through how this is going to work. Every time we're going to give you an idea for how much time it's going to take. On this one, it's probably going to take you 3 hours to wrap your head around it, to download the apps, to execute it, to shoot it, and then to work it all up. Now after that, it should probably only take you about 20 minutes to do each subsequent one. There's just a little bit of time though that I think it's going to take you to figure it out. But I'm hoping this might be the first thing you could try over the weekend, integrate it into your videos. Now as far as cost goes, it's nominal. If you have a smartphone, it's going to cost you from $0, because the app is free, to $5. That's if you get the add-on studio version of the app. So super cheap, very affordable, something I think you can all use. Broad overview. That's the big picture with stop motion. Well, it's really simple. You're basically taking individual frames, individual pictures, that when you put them together, you can give this idea that there is motion involved, when in reality, you're actually creating that motion. The stop motion that I grew up with as a kid was Gumby. Classic stuff. That falls into the world of claymation. It's a form of stop motion. It's one of 4 categories we're kind of talking about here. Now, I love that stuff. Then you have this stuff, which is moving objects. Now, that would fall under the category of object motion. Or you could take paper cutouts like this. That's a category called cutout motion. And finally, you could animate people as if they were figures in a stop motion set. That's called pixelation. And I've actually dabbled with that a little bit. It's super fun. This, for example, was 3 days of Haley standing on my back, moving 1 inch at a time in sub-freezing weather in Chicago. It was insane, and I completely destroyed that jacket and that outfit. The stuff that you see in theaters now, that has gone 1 step further than Gumby. In fact, you might see something like this. This is Nightmare Before Christmas. All that stuff takes hundreds and hundreds of people, and there are great behind-the-scenes pieces that are really fun to watch, but I found that watching those behind-the-scenes pieces doesn't really make me want to create my own. In fact, it almost makes me want to do the opposite. It makes me think that's way beyond my reach as a creator. But then you have people online like, say, this guy. His stuff is fantastic. I'm going to leave links to all of that below. It's amazing. He has these simple sets, he shoots them with a DSLR camera, and he uses a stop motion software called Dragon Frame. And then he can go 1 step further. He can take each shot into Photoshop and erase little pieces in the frame that he doesn't want to be there. And that is definitely the way that you would want to go if you're going the professional route. You're going to start doing this as your job. But just understand that the software there for Dragon Frame is $300. Other than that, if you have a DSLR already, it's fairly nominal. So if you have a big project, maybe that's the way you want to go, and I can refer you in the links below to going more of that professional route. But this video is going to kind of look at the broad overview of what you need to think about doing your first stop motion. And remember, simple doesn't always mean worse. It just depends how you set things up anyways. This is a simple setup I have with my son. Essentially what we have here, August is moving little letters across a piece of paper, and we have an iPad with an app installed up there on the shelf and it's pointing down. We have kind of a convenient setup here to do it. We have an app on the iPad that we downloaded called Stop Motion Studio, and this is what I recommend that you do right now. It works a lot like Dragon Frame in that it captures one picture at a time onto your timeline, and then you can pause it at any time. You can see where you are kind of by scrolling backwards or forwards, and then afterwards you can review those frames. So at times I got my hand in the shot, you can delete those really easily on the app. The app is super self-explanatory, so all you have to do is go download it. You'll figure it out. My son, who's 6, figured it out.
It takes pictures and then it like puts them together and then they go in order to make a whole movie.
Let's walk through some of the things that you need to think about as you're doing this stop motion, just general concepts. First, keep it steady. Now essentially you need a tripod or some sort of stable surface for your camera. Here I had the ideal situation in that I could lay the iPad on a shelf above the paper and we could occasionally stand up and see what was going on. You could also use a DSLR on a tripod like this. I've done that plenty of times before. Or recently I purchased this holder for the iPad and that works great. 2, don't touch your camera. It looks terrible when you touch your camera. You need to have a remote trigger, something like this, that you can trigger your camera with. For instance, this is my son not doing that and touching the picture button every time, and it moves the frame around. It just doesn't look all that fantastic. Instead, you can set it to say take a picture every 10 seconds or so. That's something you can do on the app. It'll beep a few seconds before the shot and give you a second to get out of it.
Oh, gotta get out of the frame.
Or you could download the app on, say, another phone, link the iPad and the phone together and trigger it that way. And we're actually triggering it with remote camera. So right up there, that is one of my iPhones. And then over here, it's being triggered by this iPad. And I found that works really nicely because it gives you a remote view of what you're taking a picture of. 3, make sure you're shooting manually. Just like you do a time lapse with your DSLR, you want to make sure your aperture, your shutter, your ISO, your white balance, your focus, all of those things are locked. You're not touching them. Now in the app, you can do that. You can lock all of those things. You just have to click the button that says don't change as I'm shooting. Because if you don't do that, you risk having a flicker effect. And 4 is lighting. Now speaking of the flicker effect, the way you avoid that is have good consistent lighting. And that usually means you're going to be shooting inside where light's not changing. You want to make sure there's not a window nearby. Now the lighting doesn't have to be anything complex. Light it just like you would any other scene. Now the one important thing to realize though is that you're going to cast shadows as you move around. So if you're stepping back out of each frame to take the picture, you could be causing a flicker of yourself based on where you're standing. For instance, my son was doing this unintentionally here, and also just realized sometimes that flicker is a thing. Yeah, if you go on and you find After Effects templates for stop motion, they add flicker to them to sell it. You may or may not want that flicker, but hopefully you're doing it intentionally instead of unintentionally. 5 is frame rate. Now, the only reason to think about that is you need to know how many frames to shoot to have a certain sequence in your video. So, for instance, you're watching this at 30 frames per second, so if you wanted a 10-second stop motion, that would mean 300 frames. In reality, doing stop motion, you're not going to be using that many frames per second because you're going to have this jittery kind of stop motion effect. So you're probably going to end up only shooting 7 or 10 frames per second. And you can play with this in your editing program, but just realize that's about what we're looking at. Audio. Now this is super important because you are creating still images that are silent and you have to sell this stop motion. So if I take my script here, I can add it to the stop motion like this. Isn't that cool? Just crumpled up the rest of my script. I gotta figure out what I was gonna say. So big thanks to our patrons who are supporting this. Links below if you want to go there and say, hey, thanks for making this. Here's $1 or something. We really appreciate it. All right, that's it. So go forth, make amazing work. If you do stop motion for one of your videos or just as a project, say with your kids or for a school project, I don't know what you're using it for, leave links to that down below. I watch all of them, so I will check it out for sure. And also remember, this is the first of 52 things. If you follow along with us all year long, then you practice it once a week. You'll have a whole new tool set at the end of the year. We'll see you on number 2 coming out next week.